Hey, welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I'm the Fat Guy. Most people just call me Brett. Thanks so much for hanging out today. This is an exciting podcast. I love every episode of a podcast I do. There's usually some reason behind it, some meaning behind it, some information behind it, motivation. But some of them are just extra special, and this is one of those. I love when new, credible research comes out showing that the things that we assume to be true, know to be true, are putting into practice, believing that it's true. You get that confirmation that you're on the right track, that you're doing the right things. And today's one of those. We're talking about intermittent fasting. We're talking about cardiac patients, and we're talking about living longer. And it's just really, really exciting. So a couple of quick things. Thank you so much for folks that support the podcast. I have people who have left comments and support and ratings on Apple Podcasts, which helps us as much or more as anything I can think of. We have people who share, so you'll see it on social media or a link to it and you'll share it. That is an awesome way. Just word of mouth, telling somebody about it, sending me a message and thanking me for an episode or for certain information is always amazing. And then, of course, we have our patrons who actually chunk a few bucks my way and say, look, I appreciate what you do. Thanks for all the help that you do. I find value in your podcast. You've helped me lose weight. You've helped me get healthier. And those folks are just tip top of the awesomest. Thank you so much. Bessie Williams, Kenneth Wilkerson, Bobby Houston, you guys are amazing. If you'd like to become a patron, of course, you get this podcast for free, and I do a lot of hours of research and time and stuff that I invest in this podcast. But if you are actually a patron, you get a lot of extras. The pecan pie recipe that I just did, for example, look, if I can make a pecan pie, anybody can make a pecan pie. That was my first attempt ever in my entire life of making something from scratch. And I did the crust from scratch, did all of it from scratch. It turned out great. But anyway, we've got a whole Thanksgiving menu over there, recipes. I have a podcast about some research that I don't even do in the normal podcast. Meal plans, all kind of stuff. If you would like to do that, losewithmason.com, L-O-S-E, lose with W-I-T-H, Mason, M-A-S-O-N, losewithmason.com will get you there if you're interested in that. And finally, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast and follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is our username, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Shoot me messages. I'll help you if I can. Shoot me them. That's another benefit of being a patron, by the way, is it has its Patreon has its own messaging system. You guys go to the first of the line. If you have questions, I go above and beyond to help you guys out. So that's something else to consider if you want to become a patron. So this new study is out, and it confirms things that we already knew, that we had other research for, but it's another layer to the armor. It's another body of evidence to add to the knowledge that we already have. And it specifically addresses heart cath patients and cardiac issues and life longevity, which longevity is the ultimate goal, right? Not just longevity, but health and longevity is the ultimate goal. It's not just about a few pounds here or there. So I really like studies that confirm that you're doing the right thing to live as long as possible. This is from the Intermountain Healthcare Heart Institute, which is in Salt Lake City, Utah. The researchers over there just completed a study that found that cardiac catheterization patients who regularly practice intermittent fasting live longer than patients who don't. In addition, the study found that patients who practice intermittent fasting are less likely to be diagnosed with heart failure. So, if you don't want a heart failure diagnosis, or if you've already had some problems and you've either had heart catheterization just for them to check for blockages, or if they've done heart cath to repair stuff or widen the arteries or do stents, and you want to live longer, intermittent fasting is for you. So what were the parameters of the study? How legit is it? The process, mode, and all that stuff. Well, it's quite a few patients, over 2,000 patients who underwent cardiac heart cath from 2013 to 2015, answered the questions about their eating habits, They talked about how often they ate, how much time they went with eating. In other words, do you skip breakfast? Do you just eat lunch and dinner? Do you normally eat, from noon to 8? Or are you a person that eats all day? And so they found out, how much time they were intermittent fasting. And also, did you do things like, intermittent fasting also includes things like, skipping a day, like maybe you fast on Monday or fast on Sunday. What's interesting about that was this is in Utah, where you have a lot of LDS members who frequently fast. I think it's Sunday. They frequently don't eat on Sunday, so they're basically intermittent fasting. I think it's Sunday. They're basically intermittent fasting every week. So it's a really good place to do a study like this, because you get to find out a lot of stuff about fasting. The study lasted 4.5 years. Of course, they did follow-ups on the health and patients, mortality rates, and all that stuff, and found out that the people who implemented fasting lived longer than those who didn't. This is huge. This is a huge intervention you can do that requires no money on your part. It requires no expertise on your part. You can increase especially if you're a person that's already had an intervention like this, that you have issues with the heart or the arteries or whatever. You've required heart cath. And it's just like, what can I do? I know when I had my pulmonary embolism recently in DVTs, my first question was, what can I do? What can I do? I want to know what I can do. Only turned out not much, take blood thinners. But I did a lot of research on walking, and walking seemed to be one of the best things you could do to try to restore blood flow, keep blood flow consistent, and to encourage your body to break down blood clots. So that's what I started doing. I already do intermittent fasting, which is another tool that generates something where the body goes through and recycles old proteins and stuff. So there's a lot of indication that would help recycle the old blood clot material, which would also help. So this is something that I already did intermittent fasting, so I was happy to know that may help. Matter of fact, I chose my blood thinner based on could I fast on it or not. And it wasn't the most popular blood thinner choice, but I thought it was best for me. So back to the study. I went off a little tangent there. Sorry, but those things are kind of interrelated. But back to the study. So one of the things that can skew the results of a study are things like demographics, socioeconomic factors, of course, extra cardiac risk factors. That'd be rather, let's say they did the heart cath, but some people were really thin and some people were really fat. Those would be confounding things. Other comorbidity diagnoses, different medications, treatments, and just in general, health and lifestyle changes. This is one of the things that's frustrating about a lot of studies. Like, they'll study one little thing, but they won't figure out everything else into it. And there's something called healthy user bias, where, people who tend to be healthier may be people who eat less, who fast. And so sometimes studies won't take that to an account, but this one did. And they looked at other type things that might be involved, like do you smoke? How much alcohol do you drink? What kind of food are you eating? Not just your intermittent fasting. And even when they correctly accounted for all of those different statistics and factors, the long-term routine fasting remained a strong predictor of survival and lower risk of heart failure. So it's huge. Just doing intermittent fasting is huge. Interestingly enough, the same group of doctors did another study back in 2008, 2012, which had some pretty significant implications as well about routine fasting and intermittent fasting. And that was the risk of diabetes and coronary artery disease. And they showed in this study that was published back in 2008 and 2012, showed that decades-long development of those chronic diseases is reduced by a long-term routine fasting, which is enormous. The number one cause of death, well, I'll tell you, they're really getting close now, but heart disease is still up there and cancer is knocking on the door. I think the what we're learning more and more is those are just two different iterations of kind of the same problem, which is chronically elevated insulin and blood sugar. So it would stand to reason that people who fast longer would fare better, because when you do intermittent fasting, it allows your insulin levels to fall, and because your blood sugars fall, and so you're stopping that chronically elevated levels of insulin and blood sugar. It makes perfect sense. So if you have questions about the fasting, it sounds great. Maybe I've had a heart cath. Maybe they just went in to check out blockages, or maybe they did it and did that widen of the artery thing. Maybe they went in and found this little issue, or maybe there was a stent, for whatever reason. And they included everybody who had been heart cathed, okay? So it ranged from looking for clots. Obviously, if you're looking for clots, you've had some kind of reason, some kind of symptom or something. So that is perfectly valid no matter what the reason was, or what was found, or what happened once the heart cath was started. Here's the question is well, what do you mean by fasting? What do I got to do? How often do I got to do it? Does it have to be long? Does it have to be short? And here's the beautiful thing about this study. So it was people who just mostly did what I do, which is daily lengthening of the time between food, which is sometimes more appropriately called time-restricted eating, but it's intermittent fasting. So I eat within a 1 hour to a 6 hour window. I'd say I probably average 4. Like yesterday, I ate I think it was a 5.5 hour window. So when I ate my first meal of the day yesterday, which was around 2, I think, I was done by 7. I think it was 1:30 actually. So I started around 1:30 yesterday. It was the first time I ate, and I was done by 7 or done by 6, something like that. It wound up being 5.5 hours because I remember when I did the fasting thing, it said it'd been 5 hours and 29 minutes. And so I ate everything I ate yesterday in that amount of time, and so I don't consume any calories outside of that. So it's fasting, but you're still eating every day. So the great thing about this study is they had people that ate that way, but then because, like I said, it's in Utah, and you have a lot of these LDS members that there's one day a week they don't eat anything at all. That's a sort of a form of intermittent fasting. Like once a week, you're foregoing food for a whole 24-hour period, actually probably a little bit longer. Same result for both. When you distinguish between the two, they saw benefit in both. So whether you're somebody that does like I do, which I would argue what I do is easier, it's also more flexible, because if you find out a day where you have things going on where you can't do it, it's fine. You just don't do it that day, and then you jump right back into it the next day. But you may be one of those people who have considered fasting one day a week. This happens a lot in religious circles. But then there's also this highly popular 5-2 diet where you eat 5 days a week and you fast 2. That would work too. And I don't know if you've read about that diet, but it's called the 5-2 diet, and there's tons of information about it online if you want to look at it. But basically, you don't have to eat, those 2 days don't have to be together. In other words, you don't eat 5 days in a row and then fast for 2. You could eat 2 days, fast, eat 2 days or 3 days and fast, or whatever. So while over the course of 7 days, you're fasting 2, they don't have to be back to back. There's just several different ways to do this intermittent fasting stuff. The cool thing about the studies, it showed no matter which way you chose, you'd get some kind of benefits. You can mix and match. You could do a little bit of both or whatever. The important overall thing is I think this confirms what I talk about over and over on this podcast, is the number one thing you can do for your health, the number one thing you can do for your weight, the number one thing you can do for longevity, the number one thing you can do for clarity of mind, and so many other things that come from it, is put time between food and get those insulin levels to fall. They just fall naturally because of lack of intake of food, because your blood sugars fall. If you're not, these people that put food, this is the problem. This is the problem. I've talked about it many times. The problem with health in America today is not only just what we're eating, and it's bad. It's too much packaged stuff that's just full of refined sugars and carbohydrates. People aren't eating enough real food, People aren't eating enough, I bought this steak, and I bought these eggs, and I bought these lean leafy vegetables, and I'm cooking them. People don't do that. They buy stuff that's prepared for them, typically, or they buy something from a bag or a box or a package, which is horrible. So that's number one. And number two, people just eat it all day. You're up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're stuffing food in your mouth by 7, and you don't stop until 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So your insulin levels are elevated all the way till you go to bed. And then it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 hours during your sleeping time for them to continue to fall before you ever get your blood sugar back in a normal range, and finally your insulin can take a break. And about the time your insulin gets down, we're going to take a break. You're waking up and shoving in your food in your mouth again. And so it's just chronic elevation of insulin and blood sugars all day long, 24/7. And intermittent fasting breaks that up. And from what we're learning about heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, chronic obesity, and all these things, is that's the root cause. It's the chronic elevation of insulin. It's the chronic elevation of blood sugars. And if you can do some kind of intervention to correct that, you're going to see better outcomes in all these things. And this is just another study that shows it to be true. So if you want to read more about the information on this study, I'll put the link in the show notes. So wherever you're seeing this, if you'll just check the show notes, you'll be able to see it. And start working at look, I tell people, intermittent fasting is easy. It's so easy. You can start it out by doing 12 and 12 if you find it hard. Okay? That's simply, if you start eating at 7 in the morning, you're done by 7 at night. That's a long time to eat. If you can't work that into your eating thing, then you got problems. The other thing I would say is you just eat meals and stop snacks. So you do the two things. Go 12 and 12. So let's say you start eating at 7 in the morning, you're done at 7 at night. That's 12 hours. In those 12 hours, you don't eat all day. You eat 3 meals. You eat a meal at 7, you eat a meal at noon, and you eat a meal at 6 or 6:30, and you're done by 7. There's none of the snacking in between, and snacking includes Cokes and things with calories and sugar in them. It's, you drink water, unsweet tea, black coffee, something that doesn't have sugar or calories in it in between meals. So you just get 3 spikes of insulin spread out over 12 hours. After you're comfortable with that, you can increase it to the more popular 18-6, and so you're basically missing breakfast at that point. So you're going to start eating it at around 11 or 12, and you're going to be done by 7 or 8. You can still work 3 meals in. It works even better as 2 meals. Just do lunch and dinner, 2 bigger meals. And you get the time in between the meals. No, same thing, no snacking. And then if you want to push it further, you can do 18-6, so you're fasting 18 hours and you're eating in a 6-hour window. You want to push it further, you can do 20 and 4. But you start out. If you try starting out doing 16-8 and it's too hard, do 12-12 for a week, 10 days. And then moving on up. And you can get there. I sound like the old Jefferson show. Well, I'm moving on up. All right? Just put some time between meals. You got to put time between meals so blood sugars fall, which allows insulin to fall, so you're not in a chronically elevated state with the insulin and the blood sugars. Great research. Links will be in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. Share this. You might change somebody's life. You might save somebody's life. You might extend somebody's life, and it might be somebody that you love very much. Follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the username across the board, no matter which one that you like. Give us a review on Apple Podcast. If you appreciate bringing things like this to you and breaking it down and talking about it, and if it helps you in some way, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you got this. Maybe you got us in the Google Play Store. Find the review process. Leave us a review. 5 stars are much appreciated. Complimentary words about how we helped you in some way are appreciated. And finally, if you really want to step it up and chunk me what's the equivalent of a Whopper once a month, that would be awesome. Just a way to say, hey, I'm going to buy you a Whopper this month. You can do that at losewithmason.com. 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 I really, really love my patrons. Guys that say, hey, you give me some value. Here's a little bit of value back as a way to say thanks. I thank you all. Appreciate you all. I hope you have a fantastic day today, and thanks for listening to this episode.